uh, is the brainchild of Substantial Magazine, a magazine that tells the stories of affluent minorities and discusses relevant issues that directly impact our communities, brothers. And now more than ever, I think we should be having substantial conversations about so many things, right? Like, it's just amazing to me that we're living in a time that we're living in. But before I dive into that, I want to again welcome you all and say thank you, for joining us this evening. I've had the pleasure of talking to each and every one of you men, different levels at different times in my life, and in each of those, I count it as a blessing. Just the amount of time and knowledge and passion about everything that you all do, that you pour into me, it's only right to find a unique way to amplify that. And so without further ado, I want to thank Brother G Todd Taylor. I want to thank Brother Terry Brown. I want to thank Brother James White. And I want to thank Brother Sirensphillips, all of which will have a few moments to talk to you, bring a more formal greeting of who they are, what they do, their values, what they stand for. And I want to start us out, one, by asking, how are you all during this time? We look good to have been stay at home, COVID-19 quarantine, but really, how are y'all doing? And then as you all give your formal introductions, I want you to start with what really brought us here tonight, which is this notion of how do we save our young men, man? Like, how do we really begin to have conversations, real, genuine, authentic, difficult conversations about the lives of young Black men that are being taken in the injustices that are continuously existing right now in our world and in our nation and in our society. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Brother Garrett. Please bring greetings, who you are, and speak for about 3 to 5 minutes. I know we can go forever, y'all, but to be respectful of our time and everybody who's viewing's time, about 3 to 5 minutes of just the recent events around Ahmad Arbery.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Greg, to speak, and thank you for bringing this platform to head. We're in a situation now where we really have to have these conversations. I'll bring you, first of all, greetings from Greenville, North Carolina, where I am a small business man. I work primarily in mental health, behavioral health care. I've been working. This would have been this is my 20th year in business, and we have been working with at-risk juveniles and the community at large with nonprofit work and just working around a plethora of issues that are affecting our community, and been doing so for quite some time. And we're in a situation now where we're seeing the manifestation of years of neglect and years of media misrepresentation of our youth, and we're seeing the unfortunate consequences of it. We have been, as a people, been labeled since the very beginning as aggressive, as violent, and we have allowed the American media, American government to put into the American consciousness this interpretation of Black manhood as aggressive, as violent, as a group of individuals that have to be maintained lest we attack and become a danger to those around you. And without the adequate level or the adequate response to that or counter narrative, we see the unfortunate consequences where just merely our presence is inciting violence and action and towards the negative. I mean, there really is no safe space if you're an African-American male in this country. Whether you're sitting at home watching TV, then, there's nothing stopping someone from busting in your door and taking a life. And I think probably the biggest travesty of all of this, we understand the bad things happen. And the first thing people love to do is talk about, well, what about Chicago? What about these other situations? What we are upset about, and let me make sure we really break down what this anger is. The issue isn't that bad things happen to African Americans, it's bad things happen without consequence. The fact that someone could take a young Black life and do so without consequence is a thing that has been going on far too long. And it's something right now, quite frankly, we don't have the luxury of waiting any longer to solve.
You preaching. You preaching, man. Thank you so much for that, bro, G Todd. I'm gonna bounce it now to good friend and brother of mine, my LB, Torrance Phillips.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My name is Sirens Phillips. I'm an attorney by trade here in South Florida. I'm a managing partner of the Fort Lauderdale office of Liebler Gonzalez. That's a commercial litigation law firm, right? But in my personal time, I do a lot of volunteer work with 100 Black Men in South Florida. My fraternity, Omega Psi Phi fraternity. It's good to see my two good brothers here on the panel with us. And also on my own time, I do quite a bit of stuff. With the 100 Black Men, we have the opportunity to do a lot of mentoring. So it goes to what this brother was just talking about. You know, it's one thing for us to always focus on, and we need to focus on the impact of the Black life being lost. We also need to focus on the fact that, you know, there's this presumption that the Black male has perpetrated or is doing something to cause whatever repercussions he's facing. When it can also be institutional, it can be, it can just be the fabric of America, right? But when we talk about the embrace of that and the belief of that, we also have to understand that we embrace and believe it as well. Legislation that was passed in the 90s, I personally supported, have led to mass incarceration, right? But currently, we have people who are adopting it on both sides, right? So we believe in the prosecution when it doesn't look like us, but we don't step up to administer that same level of outrage when a young Black life is taken, right?
Wow.
Okay. And it needs to have the same exact reverberation. Now, that's not what we're here today about. What we're here today about is the whole systemic oppression that's happening in Georgia of a case where it looks to be a clear, in my opinion, clear modern lynching. But we're going to talk about what opinions mean, right? We're going to talk about what we bring to that conversation, what our experiences teach us to believe. My experiences give me a particular bias that your past doesn't give you. Confirmation bias can be really, really strong. When I first heard about this case, it was about, I want to say it was mid-March. I saw something on the internet about it. Later, Don Lemon actually covered it briefly. There was no video. The before intensity around this case was de minimis. What you had was a scuffle, you had a gun, you had a police or former police officer shooting said gun, or someone related to the police officer shooting said gun. The video really concurs with the narrative that was out. The individual who leaked the video was the attorney or the attorney who interviewed the two that were subsequently arrested. He didn't leak the video so that they would be arrested. He leaked the video to prove that they weren't Confederates running down the street with a flag hanging behind them. Short of that is, he literally thought it was exculpatory information that he was leaking. It really is a confirmation bias type situation, often in the way things get prosecuted or they get approached in the media. There's another shooting going on, information going on right now, a gentleman named Sean Reed. He was accused of shooting someone, shooting at some people at some unknown time. And later he ran from the police. The police put 10 bullets in his head and made some pretty outrageous comments. They didn't realize it was on live as we are. That's not this case, but there are a lot that it talks more to the confirmation bias, right? I literally have friends who are saying, I want more information, even though they have a video of what occurred. I want more information because maybe his prior bad act somehow can be influential on what we believe he did today. So when we get to a situation where we hear a young man was in an area and there was supposed theft and he's jogging down the street and these two law enforcement, or one former Leo and his son, they pursued this purported robber, it fits into a lot of the biases that Black, white, institutionally we all have. It took a video to change some people's minds on it. And even then, you know, if we're being completely objective, the narrative fits the video. So which one was it, right? I mean, I know what I think happened and I know what my eyes showed me, but you know, I think I've spent my minute. Sorry, Rick, I told you I would.
Hey, listen, it's okay, man. You get into that space where you'll start like you put a lot of legal jargon in there too that I'm gonna come back to, and I was writing some stuff down. You know, I'm coming back to you in just a moment. But
Brother Terry.
And so I'm gonna bounce it over to Brother Terry, who is a man of many things. But I mean, I just want you to kind of speak to your perspective, because we've had a really good conversation about this, and I'm humbled that you were able to join us tonight to share some of your thoughts, words, and leadership.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm humbled by the invitation. I feel so unworthy to be on this panel with these superstars that you have on here, but I'm thankful. And you know, I'm a person who's, you know, spends a lot of my time you know, coaching, whether it's kids or whether it's adults on life skills or things like that. I'm a lawyer by trade. I spent a whole bunch of my time in prosecutors' offices, so I understand, you know, the thinking that goes into a lot of the decisions that happen in prosecutors' offices. And so for me, when I look at these situations, especially because they appear to be coming more and more frequently, I try to focus my attention on how are we different from the last time this happened. Wow. How are we different? And I believe that as we go forward, as we talk about what happened in this particular case and what should happen or what might happen or what we hope to happen, I think we also need to spend some time on what do we do tomorrow? Because we don't know when the next one of these is going to happen. And so if we're going to have a conversation about saving and securing our young men, we've got to have a conversation about protection and how we protect Black men. And that I think comes down to a real conversation about how we relate to one another. Because in large part, what we do is we operate, you know, individually in a bunch of different places all at the same time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's not how some of our counterparts, that's not how they behave. They deem themselves as being part of one bigger army. And I think one of the classic things that was done to us years ago was this notion of keeping us divided. And I think that what we've got to do is come together as a community, understand, because here's the beauty of it is, there was a time when the playbook was a secret. The playbook's not secret. The playbook's wide open. It's laying right there for you. We know exactly how the game is played. We just not playing it. And so I think we've got to have a real conversation about how we get in the game, how we get on the field, and how we position ourselves to win. And the way we do that is by, outsmarting, outthinking, outmaneuvering them at the playbook that they're using. They wrote it down. If they can read it and play by it and win, so can we. And so I'm glad to be here and glad to be a part of this conversation.
Hey, listen, first and foremost, man, do y'all see why I wanted to make sure he was here? Now, before I get into a lot, because I was writing still, if y'all see my head down or hear me typing, it's because I'm jotting down certain pieces of each and every one of y'all's thoughts and openings, because I'm going to come back to them. But now I want to give the floor, yield the stage to my brother James White, who during the Black Lens Symposium, and when I first met this brother, walked into my office and first time I met him, and began to pour into me words of both history, present day knowledge of, and like this future sense of where we all should be. And so I'm gonna just be quiet and allow Brother James to introduce himself formally and speak to the topic that we're here to talk about tonight.
Well, man, Greg, first of all, let me make sure I correct that moment that we had together, because it was a reciprocal moment. And I think tonight is evident of the giftedness and the leadership that you have just in your response, as Terry was saying, what do we do next? But part of what you've done, Greg, is you have automatically really put a sense of adaptive leadership right into play to where you're adapting. I'm excited when I listen to everyone. You're bringing together, because the reality is we're having the conversation, but we're just not having it like this. And we're not having it as well to where none of us here on this, in this time, have any particular agenda other than wanting something to be communicated from a perspective that hopefully will instruct, inspire, and move others to some sort of action. I so agree that absolutely there is implicit bias at play. And yet one of the realities of that implicit bias is because of the narratives that have been told. And even we've mentioned some of them, but I think we lack a historical understanding of the narratives of how we've gotten to where we are. So for example, even when we talk about video, well, and again, for me, I may be the oldest one here, I'm 59. And so some of this, I'm gonna come from a perspective of having really lived through some major moments that I'll talk about later, because I don't want to use my 5 minutes up for this. But one of the things when we talk about how this has hit us all, and I think from a psychological internal perspective, is absolutely, we're confronted with the systemic realities that now all of this says, because what this says is that there's a system that is broken, especially when you look at the number of DAs and when you look at everyone who has seen this. This really does point to something very different than Rodney King. Rodney King, we thought it was just a group of cops that got off. Here you have a whole systemic response that we're able to see immediately that has failed. And that's one thing that is different. I think the other thing that is different too is since Rodney King, we had this hope in technology. We thought that a camera makes a difference. And I think Torrance was sort of pointing to that, because the reality is, even with the camera, we know from Philando Castile, we know from Sandra Bland, we know from Eric Garner, where you can literally see that a camera doesn't give you hope. With Rodney King, that was the cry. That's why it led to a riot. Because when Rodney King happened, we knew, okay, we got him because it's on film. And you can look right there at the horror. And then when they were let off, I think there's a whole different level of complexity when we engage this conversation at this time. And then for us as Black men, well, I think even tonight is a model of a new reality for who we can be as Black men. That our connection now, again, I grew up in the time when we had the conversation, but it was in the barbershop. And boy, do I miss those days, because I haven't been in a barbershop for years. but now we've got a whole different way of connecting. And part of what's beautiful about this call too, is one of the things that's missing is the multi-generational connections that need to take place that we've missed since we deconstructed the center of the church, which is no longer the cultural thinking center of the Black community anymore. And now that whole center is very different, even in light of the generational divides that exist as well too. So what we're modeling is a whole new way of connecting conversations that really can be transformative. So I think one of the action steps that we start even with the beginning is, may this become a model for other conversations. And I just think that's an outcome that we got to hold on to, because sometimes when we engage in this kind of dialogue, we wonder, what have we accomplished? But I think already in the very beginning, we've accomplished something just by having the conversation that hopefully will be reproduced.
Do y'all see? Okay, so again, and I'm talking not to you all right now on the panel. I'm talking to every person that's viewing this, every person that's joined us via the actual Zoom right now. Why I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to pull these brothers together, and pull brothers together that aren't going to just simply in reactionary ways go, I'm mad and we need to do something, right? Like, I'm mad, and intellectually, as I process all the information that's available to me, all the stories, all the, man, let me tell you, all the posts, all the news articles, all the content, intellectually process that. I've been consuming as much of it as I can, y'all, not only in preparation to have this conversation, but to have a multitude of conversations in the many hats that I wear, in the space that I am professionally, in the space that I exist in as a professor, as in the space that I exist in as a mentor, right? Like, because the trauma of this incident will outlast what these moments are, right? And you hit on that. I say that because you hit on that, Brother Terry. You hit on that, Brother James. You hit on that, Brother Garrett. You hit on that, Brother Torrance. Oh man, we've been here before. And so I'll start the dialogue or the Q&A off with a simple question. How does this continue to happen? Right? Like somebody, and I'm talking to the two that's got the Esquire on them, the JDs for just a moment. Like, what true legal grounds did the Michaels even in their mindsets begin to think they had to approach Ahmad?
Well, let me jump in. I mean, I think that again, look at the playbook. We know what the justification is going to be because the Waycross prosecutor already wrote it down. He wrote it in his memo. And so what he said is that I don't know how he knows this, but what he said was their intent was to stop Ahmad and detain him until law enforcement got there. And then he made the statement, which is perfectly legal in the state of Georgia. And so what happens is that this keeps happening because, and no one, in a grand sense, you wouldn't admit this, but it's because people think it's okay. On the McMichael side, they think it's okay. They had every right to do what they were doing. They were champions of their community for doing what they were doing. And if we're not careful, on the flip side, in a really weird and sick kind of way, we're not sure it's not okay. Because after these things happen, I always ask, what is the change we're demanding? I don't ever see it. And so we have a pattern, right? When these things happen, especially lately. So something happens, we jump, right? Some of us, more so than others, we show our rump. Then we call Crump, and especially lately, we blame Trump. And that's just what we do. That's just, but my thing is that none of those things are going to prepare us and equip us to deal with this going forward. Like, and you see it every day, like they put the microphone in some other so-called leader's face to get their take on what happened. And then I'm supposed to be swayed by what that person's reaction was. Oh, that was a good reaction, so I'm gonna support that person. I didn't really like his reaction, so I'm not gonna support that person. When the real question should be, I don't wanna know how you feel about what happened to Ahmad. What I wanna know is, what have you done since the last one of these happened? And for the answer for all those people, it's gonna be nothing. That's what we have to stop allowing. And so what they thought is that, hey, we had a problem in our community. This guy matched the description. I don't even know what the description was, right? And the other thing I don't know yet is who's the person that called 911? Because someone was on the phone with 911, right? So that's what they thought. That's what the supposed justification was, is we're gonna stop him and detain him until the police get there. Now, to me, where it all falls apart is stop and detain cannot evolve or devolve into chase and shoot. That's not, come on, man. And so we've got to be able to demand something happen as a result of this. We've got to demand that our so-called leaders make something different happen so that we're not in this same place again next week, next month, next year. And until and unless we're ready to do that, we gonna keep having these conversations about these dead brothers.
Torrance, I see you. I see you.
Well, no, I agree wholeheartedly with Brother Terry, right? It's one thing to have a position of outrage after, right? But what are we doing in interim? Now, what we may disagree slightly is I do believe that some of these people are doing some of the material things that need to be done. They just need to do it more stridently. But who's most responsible? Us. As Brother Terry said, we look to Trump. That's the executive branch. We don't look at the legislative branch. Those are the people who write the laws by which we live. This is Zimmerman 2.0 on steroids, right? They have a law, stand your ground. Why is there a law in Georgia with an open carry state, which the prosecutor also went out of their way to say this person was illegally carrying a firearm at the time that they made this pursuit and then they were going to have this arrest, right? When you have these laws on the books, then people can use these as a pretextual argument to do the harm they intended to do.
That's
and
right.
not covered by the law.
That's like a pretextual argument by which, okay, go ahead. I'm gonna be quiet.
You're talking to me for how long, bro? No, but yeah, that's pretty much it, right? So we need to get behind our legislators who will actually try to make those changes and get cases that come through that describe what is or isn't appropriate for this self-defense. We were talking previously, and one of the things I brought up was, at what point is it self-defense? Is it self-defense after I've pursued you and now you, in fear, are reacting to an immediate threat? Is that self-defense that you can now justify harm because you really are afraid because now I'm swinging on you, right? But you have a weapon. But I'm swinging on you because you have a weapon. Is that self-defense? You've created an entire situation. That was the presumed self-defense here, right? Clearly, the young man engaged in physical activity and he initiated the contact at that point. But did he initiate the contact? He was bracketed between two vehicles with gun-carrying people. He had to be in terror. He had no option, in my opinion. But that's an opinion. What does the statute read? What's that start case law say about the situation, right? So this is the work that Terry's talking about that has to occur not during the high point and the peak of our anger, but at that voting booth. How many people on this phone right now, on this call right now, know who their congressman is for the district? And who did you vote for? Did you vote for somebody because they had a D or an R? Or did you vote for somebody who had your policies in mind? And that's one of the initiatives that one of the brothers in my chapter is doing here locally. We're going to focus on making sure we get people who are actually trying to be active and make some change. Change starts ground up. Those things funnel through. Yes, we need to make sure that the executive is something less than what we have, right? Or more than what we have. We think we have any left. But we need to work on the legislative body.
Listen, you again, brothers, y'all are pulling out so many key pieces, man, that could be so many different substantial conversations. You just said something that I want to make sure I go back to in just a moment, but I want Bro G Todd to weigh in on this from a place that I know Bro G Todd gonna come from, which is these white men got in a truck, chased a black man down the street, and then after they found themselves having made the ultimate mistake, they got on the phone with their friend. And they said, hey, friend, I done messed up. Help me out. What I need to do? What should I say? How should I say it? What? So, Bro G Todd, I want you to help me out, man. Like, when you first saw this, when I follow you on social, you're active, man. You say what you mean what you say, and I genuinely appreciate you for being authentic. Like, help me out. Like, what ground, man? Where was your head when this happened? You was on mute. You was on mute.
Cool. But yeah, to be honest with you, I received this video. Not the video. I didn't receive the video. I got a report of this. I heard about this. Someone inboxed, because a lot of people do inbox because they do know I'm pretty vocal. Somebody inboxed it to me. A synopsis of the story. They spoke about the break-in. Of course, at that moment, this is before the video. So I got a report in the inbox of a brother who and didn't want to. I couldn't emotionally digest it at that moment. And so then the video shows up, and then you see what actually happened versus what the reports were. And because the media is equally as complicit in this. We got to make sure that when we're holding folks accountable, we have to make sure that we hold the media as accountable, because they again took initial reports, went no further, and that was the end of the story, and totally ignored the family all this time. And so we want to back up a little bit, because when we start talking about, and I know we got two far more qualified brothers, but to talk about the legal aspect of it, but we got to make sure we understand that the first thing they did, going back to that, getting that story correct, and being the caller and the individuals familiar with the law themselves, we got to make sure we understand that there was a attorney, one was a former police officer. They said he looked like a suspect in a string of break-ins. That sounds good until you go back and they start pulling the reports over the last few months, and there was no string of break-ins.
Right.
So the baseline argument saying that there was a string of break-ins, ergo we saw a suspect who resembled, is a complete and utter lie. Even one so that the media has not been reporting. So we want to make sure we get that out there, that from what I understand, there was no string of break-ins even to report. So the last break-in in that area was actually, I believe, one of the suspects. Their vehicle was broken in and it was left unlocked, and guns were alleged to be taken out of the vehicle, out of an unlocked vehicle. So if anything, that was negligence. As a gun owner, you have a responsibility to secure your weapons. So, but that was the last break-in that was reported from that area. So then when they got this brother boxed in, and like you said, the event happened, and they called a friend. That goes back to something that you and I have been talking about, and Brother Brown, you mentioned, and Brother Torres, we've got to have a voter accountability to our elected officials, because my buddy now is a district attorney. The district attorney now makes sure that the charges are put in a way that, or they've helped them phrase it in a way so that no charges be filed. But that goes to why, as African Americans, we have got to stop overlooking that position. I always say the most important position in the legal system is your district attorney. I have a lot of friends because I work with juvenile delinquents, and I have seen these kids have and I'm sorry, I've worked with juveniles, young people who committed offenses and considered to be, because they are smart young men and women. But when I show up in court sometimes with these children, the district attorney has already worked with the lawyers. They've all got together. They put a package together that they know they put the judge in a position they have no choice but to find it a certain kind of way. And so, we have to understand that until you have a district attorney in each area that's working for you, then we're already lost before we even got started. It was the case because we have to understand that they can also phrase these charges, whether they're overcharging or undercharging, and that can also ensure that the person they're trying to get off will get off. If they overcharge, then that person won't meet the minimum standard to prosecute, and therefore that person's going to get off no matter what. So we have to make sure that we are holding our district attorneys accountable. Look at their records. We have got to get these folks out of office, because they are the ones who are really the gatekeepers. When we talk about gatekeepers, and I hear that term so many times in our community, young brothers talking about gatekeeper this, gatekeeper that. The real gatekeeper, especially when it comes down to the legal system, is your district attorney. Cool. So, so we have got to hold that person the most accountable out of everybody.
Hey, listen, you pulled it right off the paper, man, that this notion of, like, when we think about elections and voting, like the that DA position is an elected position. And so I want to make sure that there's an understanding that your vote, when we say your voice matters, your vote count, it don't just count to get Trump out, right? It don't just count to put Obama in. It don't just count. It counts so much more holistically, man. And sometimes we got to be able to step back and see the big picture and how all those dots connect, man.
And and Greg, I'm going to add, we got to make sure our young folks understand that. They're getting dismayed with the voting process. I'm always trying to hold my young people because I see it all the time. They love to say, I don't vote because it doesn't do anything for me. I see no purpose in voting, because we're looking at it from a national perspective. And from a national perspective, we were persecuted under Democrats and Republicans. But, when Clinton was in office, there was a ghetto. When Bush was in office, there was a ghetto. When Obama was in office, there was a ghetto. When Trump is in office, there's a ghetto. So for them, I vote for all of these leaders, and regardless of which one is in office, my situation has not changed in the ghetto. And we understand that. But they have to understand that the true power of elections are local. And we have to do a better job of educating our young people to that fact, because until they understand the power of that DA position, the power of their city council to make sure funds are allocated in proper neighborhoods, we're going to continue to lose. And they have to understand that. And we have to make sure we do our job to make them do that.
Back to what you were saying, to some degree, I do want to take an exception to it. You called it a mistake. You said he's going to pick up the phone and say it was a mistake. This kind of ties back in what Brother Taylor's talking about. It wasn't a mistake, it was a success. They did what they needed to do under the current laws to what they thought covered their tracks, to the point where with the video, again, it was leaked by them as exculpatory evidence. Like literally, they thought this video would get them off. They thought it was a success. District attorneys are great and they are the gatekeeper. Who is writing that law that that district attorney is working under? So when you go vote for all of it, and know who's writing that law, because that's the district attorney is going to work within that parameter to some degree. But this whole thing that we're talking about here that happened, and it's happened before, and it'll probably happen again. Hopefully there won't be video. I mean, there will be video. There is a video. We're not talking about this. Let's just be honest. We don't keep our eye on the prize like that, on the ball like that. If there isn't video, none of us are talking about this right now. So we need to use this as a platform to make sure we do things going forward, which is enable ourselves, empower ourselves, use our franchise, and educate ourselves about it.
Bro,
Amen.
so pin that, because that's the conversation you and I had that stemmed into I got to bring you on here to talk about this notion of just think about the sheer number of these types of incidents and occurrences that are happening all across our nation, and there is no video. The only thing we got to go on is that report or that hearsay, right? So hold that, pin it for me, because Brother James, I want to come to you because, bro, like I love how y'all are playing off of each other in this notion of segueing, because as Brother G Todd mentioned, this notion of history, right? And historically, and I always come back to my brother because Brother White, we started off this conversation even before we were on broadcasting with this notion of the modern day Emmett Till. We for you and I being here, G Todd, even in North Carolina, to have, even after this thing has happened, to hear about the incident in Pender County with the high school senior whose mom was literally in the back room about to lay her head down, and all of a sudden what I would consider a modern day lynch mob come knocking on her door and want to demand something, right? So let's just for a minute, man, if you can, in your way, Brother James, take us through this lineage, right? And each of you have said it. In each of these incidents, there's been another one. What has happened, y'all? Like, what is this, Brother James? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I want to comment, man, I love, and I just want to say to those who are listening, this is where, once again, the fruitfulness of this conversation have been some of the things that have been said. So what we've already said is the political process is essential. Understanding who is your congressman, understanding who is your DA, then understanding the power of the DA, some of the limitations. I just hope who's ever listening to this would listen to this in a way that they're taking away valuable insight that can be applied tomorrow, Monday. Those are some of the next steps. Now, the other thing I will say is one of the things that I think we don't want to lose in this conversation is absolutely who you vote for is important. But I think that's one of the challenges in the Black community is not understanding how the whole system fits together. Because it is not just who you vote for, but part of who you vote for has a lot to do with how the story is told. And so it's all these pieces have to fit together. I think Brother Taylor said something in the beginning when he talked about media. And one thing that I had a chance to do, and this is the beauty of technology now, because there's not as many secrets anymore. So I went and looked at how the Brunswick paper reported the incident. And it is fascinating the detail that they gave in reporting the incident. You just read how they reported it and you would think the case, how come they weren't convicted? I mean, in the newspaper, they even said that the father and the son, grabbed their gun. He got his shotgun, he got his Magnum 357. So it even says that they grabbed it even before they got in the truck. So that's one. The second thing that I thought was fascinating is how they told the story. Even in the article, they went back to, at the end of the article, they went back to Ahmad's record. Now, the only record he had was a record of having a weapon on grounds of his high school during his senior year in 2012. And that's the only record he had. And then what I thought was fascinating, and he got I think he got 5 years probation as a result of that. Then what was fascinating is also this one line towards the end of the article that said Ahmad was a great football player who was all state. And I thought, isn't it interesting that they're gonna end with that old narrative of his athletic prowess and trying to play into that narrative of him being dangerous. And so even the way the local media reported this, they're already preparing the public to look at this narrative in a particular way, which is really going to interfere with an impartial jury, and which is going so all of that becomes important, even as you look at this at every area of this and how this was set up. And even this case as well points to the narrative of lynching. I mean, the playbook was there. One, this idea of vigilante justice, which gets back to the narrative of lynching that's existed in our country for hundreds of years. And here's the other thing. Emmett Till is one person, and we go back to Emmett Till, but most of us have not done our work with Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Commission, and that is real important. When you read the legacy of lynching that existed for hundreds of years, it is mind-blowing. And when you look at this, it's the same script, that you got a father and son, and much of the historical brutality and really the mental dysfunction that it did in white people, the trauma it caused in white people, is you even had lynchings where they would have a family event. There are literally pictures where you would have fathers with their kids and with their daughters. Here's the other thing that's brutal. You even had people that did lynchings on Sundays right after church. Mm-hmm. That's just how insidious and insane this whole act. So yes, it does something even to white people, and it creates a mental illness of supremacy and injustice in the psyche of white people as well. You got a father and son, each generation, who at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, not even thinking about it's daytime. Here's why. The legacy of lynching, you lynch people publicly in the daytime as an example. And so it follows the same historic narrative that exists, and even the same brutality. So people look and they wonder, how could there be a website? How could people celebrate that? Because this narrative and this psyche never changed in our society and in our hearts and minds. And as hard as it is for us, it's difficult for us to see that. Now, here's the other place that really puts us on notice. I get it. Yes, we have a video, but we got to ask, how come Ida Wells Fannie Lou Hamer, and others who didn't have video, but they were able to organize and lead campaigns when media wasn't even as tight as it is today. And I would say there's some collective dynamics that don't exist anymore that we have lost in the Black community that makes it difficult for us to respond to this because we don't have a holistic approach. Yes, media is critical, but we got to look back at our ancestors who led some anti-lynching movements that literally shut lynching down, because until the 1930s, the data suggests there were as many as once a week somebody was getting lynched in America. And one of the most brutal lynchings took place 4 hours right there in Georgia, a guy named Samuel Host that you can read. And it even has the brutality of how fingers separated and given away, pictures taken, the postcards, et cetera, et cetera.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I echo a lot of that. I would also say that what you're talking about with the ability of those people to take their families to these lynchings, right? Historically, that cognitive dissonance is still there.
Yes.
But it manifests itself in a different way, right?
Yes.
So there's that presumption of a Black man, whether it's innocence or not innocent, and it's all part of that historical context you're talking about. It's part of what we ourselves think. So yeah, take the Claudette Colvin v. Rosa Parks type situation, right? If you have the perfect victim, you are presumed innocent and you get this outrage. We don't look at what happened in that immediacy of the actual incident when it's us. And I'm talking about us. I'm not even talking about them. We look at
Torrance, you dropped something that was powerful that I don't know if the audience understands. Some people have never even heard of Claudette Colvin. And Claudette Colvin was the young African-American teenage girl who really was one of the first ones, but because she was not, again, I think she was pregnant. And here's the other thing too, Torrance, and I know this is a whole other conversation. She was brown skinned, not light skinned. Right. So there's even the colorism thing that existed back then. Go ahead, brother.
Right, no, all of that, right? So if you have a victim who, or I'm sorry, a person who's one of these crimes was committed against, and they have a squeaky clean reputation, or they have an appearance that allows them to have a squeaky clean reputation, that can breach that cognitive dissonance gap. And I'm talking about it ourselves too, right? But if you have a kid, let's say the Sean Reed situation, we don't know all the details yet, but what we do know is what we saw. But if you have a situation where you know the kid definitely was involved with some less than savory issues, he was being pursued by the police for a robbery, because what we're talking about here, I've heard it said several times, was he obviously wasn't robbing. What if he was? If he was robbing, you still don't have an opportunity to organize a lynch mob to go out and lynch him. And that's part of it. So yeah, we can do that examination for those who need that examination to be done, but we do need to understand that we do that examination, we undercut the real situation, which is why do we have this presumption that African-American people need to be squeaky clean or need to be politically presentable to be victimized, when we know that not to be the case. But on the converse side, the first thing you do is we come out and say they were squeaky clean. They come out and tell us all the flaws that they had, and then we weigh whether or not they were good enough to be evaluated until we get some hideous piece of video. That's part of the problem, frankly, and I don't have the solution.
That's real good, Tony.
Hey, listen, y'all, like I said, I already know we could do this for hours, right? We have done this for hours. I know we were 15 minutes behind time getting started. I do have 1 or 2 more questions, 1 or 2 that have come from the folks in the Zoom. But before we even get into that, I just want to say thank y'all again. Like really to just to be able to have this conversation and understand the differences and parts from different lenses and perspectives has been nothing but helpful to me, and I'm almost certain it's been helpful to everybody that's had the opportunity to view this, that have kind of struggled between whether they should be listening to, who is it, Jill Scott and Erykah Badu now.
That's at 9. I'll be there.
But can we all just take a moment and brother Garrett, brother G Todd, I'm gonna look at you first. Speak to the traumas. And then I want to come to you, Brett Terry, because you coach, you mentor these young men. Speak to the traumas, the micro impacts that incidents like this have on the minority community as a whole. The moment these things hit the airwaves and nothing happened, like for me, I've got 2 daughters, but if I had a son that was anywhere around the age where he could go out on his own, it would change the way I felt, right? It would be like, man, don't go without me. Or look, not tonight, right? Or not today. Speak to that, bro, Garrett. And then I want to toss it to Brett Terry to also comment.
Well, what they've done, and again, what the media has done is actually they've weaponized trauma. And they've done it on 2 folds. And going back to what Brother James was just talking about, let's understand that the very first movie screened in the White House was what? Birth of a Nation, 1915. And in that movie, they weaponized white fear, white, the impact of what's going to happen when these unsavory Negroes go out and start attacking white women. And so that fear has been weaponized as a mechanism to get the populace on board with our persecution or subsequent actions afterwards. And then what they've done, just as again, as was mentioned, when they used to hang us publicly, that was not only for those white citizens who would gather and as a social event and all that. It was also for the Black individuals in the county, so they would see what happens if you get out of line. And so what they have done, whether intentionally or subconsciously, by continuously show our murders and the subsequent vindication of the offenders, is now once again shown us that we can kill you without consequence. And so it does instill a level of, well, let me hold mine here, because you want to protect them, and it keeps us in pocket. Now, what we have to do is fight through that. We can no longer stand in fear. And again, not knowing the brothers here, we all have no fear, but I do know that fear exists, that fear of what's going to go happen to my son. And personally, I have zero fear. Whatever happens is going to happen. I'll stand in the gap. It doesn't matter. But do I fear for my son, my children? Absolutely. My nieces, my nephews, absolutely. And it's definitely a different fear for the young men in my family. I think about my neighborhood. And what happens when one of my nephews comes over and wants to go jogging down the road, and he's a face they're not familiar with. Now what happens? So it is a mechanism for control, and it is a shared trauma. People have to understand that trauma, the way trauma impacts the community, it is collective, more so with Black folks than any other racial demographic. And trauma is generational. So by the trauma that we're dealing with today, some of the feelings or the emotions, these things, sometimes we don't even understand where it comes from. That's because it was not your original trauma to begin with. That's a feeling that's passed down from grandma or granddaddy. It has been proven that trauma can be passed down, and from the Bible they would say it was a generational curse. When they broke it down biblically, it was the generational curse passed down. But when we want to break it down scientifically and psychologically, that is a trauma. Trauma can change how your metabolism. Trauma can change serotonin reactions. It is something that can change. I mean, literally, when you talk about obesity in the Black community, that's also a result of trauma, not just bad food choices. It's also your body's traumatic response, because it changes your biology. And so understand that these things are not by happen chance as much as you would think. So now we're here. What do we do now? How do we get past this? And the main thing we have to do is we have to be more responsible with our own media. We got to understand what our folks are going to get. I was working with a program called Esquires for Education, and I will come in and mentor. It's a mentor organization brought on by a lot of attorneys in our area. But I will come in and I asked young men one morning, how do they feel about themselves if I called you an African? And every brother there said, it is an insult if you call me African. They were offended, they were upset. So I made them watch, what was the movie? Oh man. I'm trying to think of it. It's in my mind right now, but I brought out some of the documentaries that I've been listening to and working with about our people and the culture. And so at the end of the documentaries, I asked the brothers the same thing. And they said, I'm proud. In one afternoon. That's just the work that we sometimes fail to do. We have been running collectively from who we are and our greatness. Sometimes we don't want to have these conversations. We have been given this illusion of inclusion, and a lot of us have bought into it. And we have allowed ourselves, and we haven't taken it upon ourselves to properly educate and train our own children about their greatness. And so when they go out there, they get all these negative stereotypes and whatever, and that is the only representation they're getting. And we're not giving them the alternative. And so it is our responsibility to make sure that we correct the narrative internally, first and foremost, because it is having a psychological impact on our children when they see these type of incidences happen, when they see the portrayal. And it's also, and I gotta add to this, when you see these people going back in the histories of these young men, it is proof positive that the redemption in this country, and a Christian ideal of redemption, is afforded to everybody else but Black men. So we can talk about who's going to be redeemed and who's going to get all that. I can sit here and lock hands with you on Sunday morning and we can talk about Christianity, but the first time something happens to me, you're going to go back and retry something that happened to me 20 years ago, something I did in my past. Yet you have grown men now who are accused of sexual misconduct from 10 years ago, and they were 60 years old, and we're talking about that was so long ago. Because, but when it was one of our own color, we want to bring up and I'm saying, if we're going to hold a standard, make it universal. But it seems to be a redemption is offered in this country to everybody else but Black men. And so that's why you see these brothers continue to be victims. We're the only group of people who can be killed and now have to, after death, have to plead for our own salvation, our own victimization, because we're going to be criminalized more than the people who committed the murder against us.
Wow. Brother
so I got to jump in since Brother Terrence mentioned, Brother Garrett mentioned about Christianity in the church. I got to jump in here, a couple things. One, man, incredible, absolutely. I think there are a couple of things though, that even as we talk about this, you made a distinction between psychology and then you explain how the church had generational curse, but psychology. What I would believe is that our forefathers who had a theological, holistic framework, they hadn't been to schools to understand that they were doing psychological work on Sunday morning. So grandma's generational trauma was psychological work. They just didn't have the language to give to it. Those things aren't in opposition. Secondly, I think it's real important that we make the distinction that Frederick Douglass made. Frederick Douglass in his writing says, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. He says, I must again reject the slave-holding, lynching, cradle-robbing Christianity of this land because it does match the peaceable loving of Christ. And so I think sometimes what we call Christianity in this land is really an American white Eurocentric ideal and not a biblical ideal of Christianity of Christ. And so we don't often want to call, and so we have divorced ourselves. Many of us have divorced ourselves from the internal workings of what could happen in our lives spiritually, because we've responded to a caricature of Christianity and a caricature of Jesus rather than the real Jesus and the Christianity of Christ that did give our people a sense of liberation and freedom. I just had to say that because you stirred that up in me, Brother Till.
Look, and I'm 100% with you, because that is an important distinction. I'm with you in that I explain to our people all the time, Christianity existed in Africa far before colonialism, and we got to make sure we teach our people that. And often what we call Christianity here is a religion of white supremacy.
Absolutely.
But the problem is too many of us in leadership are worshiping at that altar.
Absolutely.
Wow. Brother Terry.
Yeah, I would just listen. I mean, that was powerful, and all I would add to that is I think what these situations do is they exacerbate fear, right? And that goes both ways, right? You know, they're afraid of us, we're afraid of them, right? It exacerbates anger, right? Obviously, that goes both ways, right? So just like you have all these, you know, all these things on Facebook supporting Ahmad, and you have also just as many supporting the two McMichaels. I mean, it goes both ways. I think it definitely exacerbates a fundamental distrust. I mean, we don't trust them, they don't trust us. That goes both ways. But I think the thing that sometimes can be most powerful, though, is this walk away of low self-worth, or this walk away of accepting the role as victim, because that doesn't happen both ways. That just happens to us. And so what happens if you're not careful is everyone's angry and fearful and distrustful, but we walk away feeling worse about ourselves, feeling that somehow maybe we deserved it, or we're not worthy, or whatever. And that's the dangerous piece that those of us who work with young folks have to make sure that they don't sign up for that class, right? What someone else's opinion of you, that has nothing to do with how you should be conducting yourself. And so if you're not careful, then what we do is we become over dependent on those folks that may not have our best interest in mind. You know, that the entity called the media, or the entity called government, because we don't feel like we can fend for ourselves. So we need someone else to fend for us. And if we're not careful, that's exactly where they want us, especially Black men. They want us on our knees. They want us begging for bread instead of standing on our feet, demanding what is rightfully ours as part of this human family.
That's good.
Listen, you sparked something in the chat, man, because I mean, I got questions coming in, and one of which was organizing on a large scale, a scale that would that would force change, takes coordination, right?
Mm-hmm. It does.
How do we even begin? And I think the comment or the question is coming from this place of when you and Torrance both have had the opportunity to speak, you spoke about this notion of what after, right? And as the title is saving and securing a future for our young boys, I'm guessing this question popped up in the mind of this participant, which is like, how though do we organize on such a large scale?
Let me just say this real quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Torrance or whoever. One of our demands has got to be effective and honest leadership. And if there is anything that we as a people have suffered from a lack of, more than most other things in some situations, it's been this notion. And so you're right, because hey, this happens in Georgia, Trayvon's in Orlando, with Ferguson, New York, Pender County. So those are all different places, right? And so if we're not careful, if we allow those to remain purely local issues, that's how they get dealt with, and they don't ever get sort of this national attention that is demanded. So my thinking is that right now this is on everyone's mind. There shouldn't be a legislator in this country, especially not in Georgia, that shouldn't be willing to make some serious changes because of what has happened. We need to demand that. And that doesn't matter if this particular state house leans Democrat or Republican. Everybody should be pissed off about what happened to that young man. And so I think on a large scale, I think that's where it starts. But I think, again, we've got to unite in terms of our energy and our concern for one another, because when it happens to one of us, it happens to all of us. And that's how we've got to embrace it. And so tomorrow morning, It has to start from, this is bigger than Brunswick, Georgia. This is bigger than what happened in that neighborhood. And all of us need to demand that it gets treated that way.
That's good.
And I want to piggyback off of that exactly, because 100% agree. But to tag back to the Reverend a little bit too, I think one of the key things, I know we have lost that center. The church was where it all came from, right? But I don't know that it's so strided in the community that we don't have any. One of the places I think we look to is social media. BLM was born on social media. Those kids got out there, they got involved, they got impactful. They're trying to make a change, and they're coming through the ranks. You can look at the Me Too movement, also born through social media. So I think there's an opportunity for social media to build that web.
Yeah.
Emmett Till wasn't I'll be done in just a second. Emmett Till wasn't the first, but what happened was he was a big media event. There've been so many Emmett Tills since then. There were so many Emmett Tills that in Atlanta, they made a serial kill out of what may have been independent people doing independent deaths among Black men, because it was happening for such a period of time before and after the arrest that, who knows if it was one individual. They don't even believe that. But Emmett Till happens all the time. But it's that disconnect Brother Brown was talking about that is the problem. We don't stitch that fabric together and look at that quilt, right, and see what it makes. We treat each one of those as swatches, and with different levels of outrage on those swatches. And we have to hold our leaders accountable for it. We'll make one caveat. It would be great if this could be the type of issue that we could say could span that gulf of discord between that cognitive disconnect we were talking about earlier, right? But here's the truth of it. There were a bunch of children slaughtered at Sandy Hook.
Wow.
President Obama tried to use that opportunity to leverage that into gun control. Never happened. 55 people were murdered in Las Vegas. Still didn't happen. Sometimes we're going to have to just be that water against that rock to smooth that stone. But to Terry's issue is we're not even a trickle. So, it's up to us to do it.
Yeah, I think, and hear me, I think you're absolutely right. I think this has been, to me, one of the blessings of COVID-19 is we now have had to redefine how we are connected together. And as far as I'm concerned, it will be a loss if we try to go back to business as usual now as we walk through COVID-19. And I caution us, it's not after COVID-19. We will continuing to be journeying through COVID-19, because the real repercussions of this economically and the real repercussions of this health-wise is going to impact us as a people in a way that I don't even think we're imagining or planning for. So I think you're on point, brother. I think now we've got to ask, though, where are the places where there can be a collective connection? And maybe and I love your quilt metaphor. Maybe our organizing is going to have to be, what are the systems that are already in place, but they're just not activated? Now, I'm not Greek. I'm not trying to throw any stones at Greeks, but one of the things that's a system that's already there that's been there for years. Man, imagine if there could be an activation of the Divine Nine saying, you know what, it is time for us to leverage our power and connections that we have in a fresh new way. Because I think the broader public is beginning to ask, what about those places where we really should have been moving? And I think that's why there's a generational gap now in our community, because Black Lives Matter looked at our generation and said, y'all not connected, y'all not doing anything, we're gonna do it on our own. And one of the hard parts about that is, and this is what we learned from the larger community, you still have to have that generational connection, because there is work, but there's a need for wisdom as well too. So I wonder if part of that activation is, man, how do we just have more respect for the networks that already there are in place? And how do we stop coming out of this conversation with simply the narrative of what people are not doing, but let's begin lifting up what people are doing? I mean, who else is on the ground in Georgia that really is getting after the work, but we just haven't lifted up? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, I think we've got to think about this systemically in a very different way.
Wow.
You know, it's funny, Brother James. I was making notes to kind of comment, and you hit on one of the key ones, and that is for us to work within the existing organizations. A couple of brothers mentioned 100 Black men here. You know, we're Omega Psi Phi is in the building, and there are a lot of other very active Pan-Hellenic organizations. We have countless, we have motorcycle clubs, we have all these other groups. And I've talked to a lot of these brothers who are willing. And so at some point, we got to come from community to community and put together some plans on how we're going to work through these situations and what's going to be our action plan in each and every community. You know, I mean, there's some issues on a national level that we need to promote on a national level across the board. One of the key issues on all of this that's really promoting why folks have this need to demonize or need to continue to persecute us is we got to be honest. There's an incentive, a financial incentive for young Black men to be locked up.
Yes.
And so on a national level, from all of our organizations, we have to work to remove that. Let's start with that very first thing. That exception in the clause of 13th Amendment that allowed for slavery to exist to this day, till 2020, there is an exception in the clause that allows for slavery right now. And we have to make sure that there is no financial benefit to our persecution. And we have to make sure that, you know, one of the few things I agree with Bernie Sanders on was the fact that he said everybody should vote. Getting locked up should not remove your citizenry. So because you're in a penitentiary, you should still be allowed to vote. We got to stop letting them strip you of your humanity, because every one of those, any incentive to lock you up will be manipulated. So we got to remove those incentives. There should be no incentive for somebody's persecution. So, and again, talking about these organizations, going back to our churches, one of the worst travesties during Obama's election was the demonization of Black liberation theology. You know, we talk, and when I watched that, when we break down what that was, it said Black liberation theology, and somehow that was demonized. Using the Bible to liberate our people and promote excellence in our people was demonized. I mean, that fact to me was just, and we let that slide. We as Black folks, we as Black Christians, let that slide. That they told us that we were somehow in the wrong because we leveraged the word of God to push our people forward and liberate our people from persecution. And so we got to go back and claim it. I am proud to say I'm a practitioner of Black liberation theology. And I think I'm not afraid. If you got a problem with it, see me. You know, we have to be bold in our assertion of who we are and the need that we have to serve the community. And before I go, because I mentioned that DVD, and it's still a very important one, it's Hidden Colors. So before I move on, it was the Hidden Colors series. And I think every one of us needed to go back and make sure our children watch that.
Hey, we appreciate that piece of information, guys. As we approach the 8:30 mark, I just want to say how, again, man, honored I am to have each and every one of y'all in my circle, to have you invest so much time, talent, and treasure in me, in what I do, and in the communities that you serve and live in. I mean, to take a moment on a Saturday from family on, you know, what will be tomorrow, Mother's Day, and just spend a moment just talking about what I would consider to be a very, very, very substantial issue that is just not right now plaguing the Black community, but has plagued the Black community for some time. Y'all, I can't thank you enough. I'm a firm believer, man, that this conversation cannot end here. And so we will certainly be having more of these, and we will, as a brand, Substantial, be trying to find unique ways to continuously amplify the voices of people just like you all, that can bring together thought-provoking ideals, conversations. And I can attest to the fact that y'all don't all see the exact same eye to eye on all of this, and that's okay, right? Like, but yet there is a common ground that we all stand on, and a belief that we all have, that if we do all find unique ways to bring our time, talent, gifts, treasures together, ain't no way it can't do anything but benefit the people, right? And so I had planned for you all to take like 1 second, 2 seconds to give any final thoughts that you all may have. And I'll start with Brother James, and then we'll sign off.
Well, I think, I agree with you that you just sparked something in me. I also think we have an opportunity to take back the false narrative of the fact that difference is a challenge. Difference is an incredible opportunity, because the reality is we needed both Martin and Malcolm. We needed both W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. And so that's one of the things that we've got to get out of mind, as well as this idea of needing this one heroic person, because that moves us away from the systemic realities that are needed for change. And I think this is an example that all of us together are going to be cool, but it's important that we are different. It's important that we do see things differently, because it's going to take a variety of strategies from a variety of places. And it's going to be important that we allow everyone to come to the table. But then we've got to understand where our gaps. I think the two more things. One, I think it's Mother's Day tomorrow. And one of the things I don't want to do is make sure we don't include the power of women in our community and the power of women that's being essential in this conversation. And I understand, absolutely, there's uniquenesses for us as Black men, but the destinies of Black men and women are intricately tied together. And that is because we're not an individualist people, we're a collectivist people, and we're a communal people, and we understand the historic role of Black men and women together. And that's a whole nother conversation. Finally, we've got to be whole people. And this is why I'm so glad that in this conversation, we talked about technically excellent, we talked about intellectually excellent, and we also talked about being spiritually sound. And all of those have to find its place together as we move this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Terry. Final word.
Yeah, I think this has been awesome. I really thank you for putting this together. This has really been a conversation that's been long overdue, and I hope we keep having them. Look, I think in a nutshell, we're at a place where there's no other way to say it other than it's time for us to arm ourselves. You know, one, I think we need to arm ourselves with legal protection. I mean, these jokers on the back of a truck had the wherewithal to pick up the phone and get a lawyer on the phone. All of us need to be able to do that. I think that's number one. Number two, I think we also need to arm ourselves with legislative protection. We need to put people in office who have our best interest at heart and get those people out of office that don't, point blank. I think we also need to focus on local leadership. We need to arm ourselves with that. We need to be mindful of judges and DAs and council people and all those people who play a huge role in the things that happen to us every day. And lastly, I think we flat need to arm ourselves. I would love to see the subtle message sent. If by the end of the year, there were 1 million Black gun owners, there were 1 million Black folks that just joined the NRA. They're in it because it's our right. It's our right. So in every one of these situations, it all plays out the same. White people with guns, Black people without. And all I'm saying is just that subtle messaging of knowing that, man, do you know in the last 8 months, there have been 1 million African-Americans who went out and got their concealed permits and who did this. Now, we're not going out and hunting folks. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm saying is, like Brother White talked about, when you go back and look at our history, you know what the Black Panthers did? They gave dignity to our community because they armed themselves and they policed the police. That y'all not coming in here with that foolishness. And we're well within our rights to do so. We're not causing any problems, but guess what? Y'all not gonna come in here and cause no problems either. And I think we have to be dedicated to protecting our families and our communities because they're just that important. I thank you, and I would be honored at any time you want to have another one of these conversations. Thank you so much, Brother Edgecliff.
Wow. Hey, that's a whole nother, you just opened up a whole nother substantial conversation. Man, this we could go on forever. Brother Torrance and then Brother Garrett, closing word. Brother Torrance.
There you go. I just want to thank you as well, my LB, my Duke's doggy. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's been fantastic. Brothers on here they gave me things to think about. I would like to invite people to listen to a young guy found on the internet, made a song called My Vote Don't Count. Talks about, his name's Yellow Pain. Look it up on YouTube. I'm going to give Gary the link. I think you'll all agree. Talks about the importance of voting. It might be something that you can show those youth that might motivate them. I've been watching a series called Handmaid's Tale, right? It's a dystopian society where the rules are so strict and they keep people in line, and it's very punitive and it's pretty dark. But in a lot of ways, we live in a dystopian society ourselves, not of our own making, right? We live in two different worlds. We live in Black America within a white America. What we have to stop doing is promulgating it. Like Brother Terry was saying in his conclusion remarks, it's up to us. The impetus is up to us to educate ourselves and armor ourselves in those things he was talking about. He's not kidding. That incident he's talking about with the Black Panthers. California has the strictest gun control in the country. Strictest in the country. It didn't. It was the Wild Wild West. What happened? The Black Panthers showed up. They did what these militia did in Michigan, really. Ronald Reagan, who was the governor of California at the time, a Republican who's supposedly gun-loving, put some laws in place to make sure that they felt that impact. Go out and register if you have the right to do it. Register for two things. Register for ability to carry a firearm and to vote. Doesn't mean you need to go buy a gun. Those registrations will have that same impact. Definitely register to vote. It's the only thing we can do right now. It's to vote and bring one person with you, and make sure you vote all the way and know who you're voting for. You have that obligation. Know who you're voting for. Vote all the way down the ballot, because that local administrator trickles up. It's called pipelining. You pipeline those people through a system. So again, thank you for the opportunity, brother. And I look forward to it. If you ever have another one, I would love to be on.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for that. And again, y'all have heard the emphasis on vote, 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 and not just for the primary, not just local, state, vote. If you got to vote for who gonna be your president and your homeowners association, vote for that too. Because as you walk around a community, you have the ability to go, I want to welcome everybody into my space and not just the folks that I know and grew up with. Brother Garrett.
Today, I think that we definitely have to, and I'm especially the one about us registering our firearms. You know, we vote in high numbers. What we have to do with our vote is hold our leadership accountable, especially the Democratic Party. Yes, have I voted 99.9% of the time myself for the Democrats? Absolutely. But I think we have to send a message to them that if they don't get off their butts and protect us the way they've done other special interest groups, we're going to withdraw support. You will not exist without African-American support. Yet, when it comes down, we're continuously being told to wait our turn, and that while they push other issues to the forefront. And we have to stop allowing other groups to get their issues pushed past us. We have to make sure that we do a better job of formatting a plan and highlighting what our issues actually are. Again, starting with, to me, I think legislation, the criminal justice reform, you know, we moved the needle a little bit, but that is not enough. We have to continue to push for more criminal justice reform, but we have to hold legislators accountable to our community, because we have been overwhelmingly in support. And we vote overwhelmingly in support of one party. And so we have to make sure they understand that. We also have to hold our allies accountable. We have been there for everybody else. We have been there on the front lines of the LGBT movement. Our Black women have been in the front lines of the women's rights movements. But every time it is an issue with us, all of our allies fall to the back. When it came down to the citizens in China, when it comes down to our Hispanic brothers and sisters at the border, we have been there. And time after time after time, they have failed to show up when those issues are confronting our community. And so the minute they get a big enough piece of the American pie or the white man's pie, they turn around and shun us just like everybody else. And we need to call them out that if you're not going to stand with us, we won't be there for you. And they know they would not be there without our power, all of it. So we have to make sure that just because you stand beside me, Jendina had a song, and just because you're around your brothers doesn't mean your brothers are with you. So you might be with me, but you might be around me, but you are not with me. We need to make sure you are with me. And we got to know the difference between friends and allies. I don't care whether or not we're friends. I need you to be my ally. So you can sit here and say, I don't have zero interest of being somebody's black friend. If I happen to be your friend, great. But I would rather to have an ally, because allies are more powerful than friends. That's one. And then we got to give a shout out to those brothers in Michigan who came, and was Sarah Anthony, I think the lawmaker was, who came and they protected her. That is where we have to start. The Deacons of Defense, we have overlooked them far too long in the Black American lexicon. We got to make sure that we mention what they did as well. So just like we had the Black Panthers, we also had those Deacons for Defense who were willing to step up and protect, and they helped to protect Dr. King too when he would go out and speak. So we got to make sure that we are willing to do what's necessary. And it doesn't have to mean that we have to go out there guns toting and guns blazing, but they need to see that same show of force, that we are willing just like they are. But we're fighting from two different perspectives. We're fighting for survival. You're fighting for tyranny. We're not trying to oppress anybody. We just want to make sure our people are survived. But and in this whole conversation, I got to go back to us as individuals doing the work with our own children, making sure our children have full knowledge of self. We can't leave that out, because there's a sincere appreciation. There's a psychological impact when we fail to show our children the greatness of who they are. And we got to stop saying somebody should do it. It is our responsibility to educate our youth, our own children. So we have to take it upon ourselves to teach our kids the greatness and wholeness of who they are and who they are throughout the history, throughout history. So I think when we really come together, link together, and work together, there's nothing we can't accomplish.
Amen.
Wow, brothers. Bro, G Todd, it goes back to that mantra, man. I am and I am not, right? I will and I will never. And it's that constant teaching, right? That constant mantra that the moment I'm faced with this type of adversity or given or put in this situation, I am most certainly not. I will and I will never, right? And it's been instilled in me in such a way that it's innate, that it immediately comes out. I am a black man. I am most certainly not whatever you have put in your minds or generationally have thought of to be a black man. I will stand here, my ground, on by any means necessary. And I will not allow for whatever it was that you thought you had in superiority over me to dictate how any situation we encounter or be in will be determined. And so, man, I appreciate you for saying that, brothers. You all are, to me, and I've said this a million times, exactly what defines my company, what defines substantial, right? The definition, which is of considerable importance, size, and worth, being strongly built or made. Y'all, that's the minority community. That's you all. That's everybody that's been watching. That's everybody that will continuously engage in conversations like this. Thank you so much. And let's go get our Jill Scott and Erykah Badu on. Signing. Love y'all. Thank you so much.
Peace out, brothers.
Root to the brother.
Root.
Root.